Welcome, everybody. This is the first of our Agentic engineering sessions. I'm Richard. I'm an engineer at Zed. We make a code editor that's awesome at AI. This is Mitchell Hashimoto, creator of lots of widely used technology, some of which you may have used. Most recently, the excellent Ghosty terminal emulator, which is my terminal emulator of choice. So thanks, by the way, for making it. Big fan.
Sweet.
Yeah, so basically, we're here to learn about how people are using AI agents to make high quality software, not just make the same old stuff faster. Ghosty is absolutely something I would count in that high quality, like raising the quality bar camp. And so, Mitchell, you've been posting about some how like ways that you've been using large language models to make improvements to Ghosty. It's not only a high quality project, but it's also lots of low level systems programming type stuff. You're not
Yeah.
like just making a web UI or something like that. And it's also in a non-mainstream language, namely Zig. And I know there are some sort of like specific challenges around that because it's not super representative of the model's training set. So why don't we just start with just talking through like a particular commit that you shared where you had sort of like the prompts that you used and stuff like that. And we can
Yeah.
just kind of talk through like what you did, how it went, like, what you've learned and sort of like get tactical about like what pieces of advice you might have for people who are looking to do the same kind of stuff. How's that sound?
Okay. That sounds great.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna just share my screen here. So this is the commit. You talked about how like this is sort of like
Oh yeah.
fixing. Yeah, do you want to just give a little context on on what the actual fix was?
Yeah. So really high level, Ghosty just shipped this new feature recently, and tip it's not like released, but it's available for beta users. Where when you close any terminal, whether it's like a split, a tab, a window, when you close a terminal, you could Control Z, Command Z to undo it. So like for like 5 seconds after you close it, it's configurable for a certain amount of time after you close it, you could Command Z and it pops back up, and like it never shuts it down. So like all your history is there, like everything stays there. And so this was I don't remember the D specifics, but this was a bug related to introducing that feature. And that feature was heavily co-written with AI tooling.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so that's sort of like the background. And so like this is it's a bug that hopefully is pretty understandable. Like undo. You want to like reopen the tab, and that type of stuff.
Yep.
So you talked about sort of like here's what the implementation needs to do, and then below that you had sort of the prompts that like you went through to actually get to the implementation. So
Yeah.
first question,
And
I guess.
although this commit message is mostly human written as well. So just
Yeah,
for that
good point.
background. Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of tell. I mean, like Claude's got a certain voice. It's not my favorite writing voice. Yeah, okay. So the implementation here. So first question I'd have for you is sort of like, did you start with breaking it down in this way? Like, did you write these bullet points up front, or was it more like you just started with this actual prompt and then you kind of ended up summarizing this like after you'd already finished doing the whole thing?
Yeah, so I think that my approach to using AI tooling for now, I mean, if the AI tooling gets a lot better, then maybe I could get away from this. But the way I have the most success is that I feel like I'm more or less, I know people don't like these titles anymore, but I'm more or less like the architect of the software project. So I still like to come up with sort of the code structure, the expected sort of data flow through the app, where state lives, things like that. Like I like to know that and imagine that in my head. And I give tooling that guidance where it's like, I want you to achieve this end goal, but using this shape.
Mhm.
And I find that that leads to the most success. If I just say, like, if I had just come into this and said like, oh, this first sentence, like this first paragraph here, when closing a window that contains multiple tabs, the undo operation doesn't work, please fix it. Like if I had done that, it probably would have done it, but it would have done it in like a terrible, hammer meets nail like way that isn't sort of maintainable long term. So yeah, I sort of I didn't come up with these specific bullet points, but you could actually see my prompt, what I said, or what I told it. But I came up with the shape of how to solve the problem and let it go.
Okay, so before we go through the individual prompts, I want to follow up a little bit on something you just kind of implied, which is like it sounds like you've tried giving it the even more zoomed out version, where you said like, "Here's the behavior, here's what I want it to do. Just go make the thing do what I want it to do." And it sounds like you were not happy with the
Yep.
outcome of that approach.
I didn't try it with this specific thing. I just
Sure.
through practice, I now avoid it. But yeah, in the past, I wasn't happy with the approach. I felt like it took a lot more massaging to get to what I wanted. I think because a lot of times I had in my head a vision of what I wanted, and like, why not just tell it that vision? Um, the only time I sort of used really open-ended ones, I call them like Hail Mary. They're like zero shot, like Hail Mary prompts. is I do have like a saved I forgot they call it Claude like slash command where I just give it an issue number and it connects to GitHub and like pulls down the issue. And basically, I don't say fix the issue. I don't trust it enough to do that yet, but I will sort of just as a Hail Mary, like as I'm triaging issues, just say like, why does this issue exist? Do you see a solution? And I try to get it to just sort of explain something and show me a path to take. And I might do that like if I'm triaging issues, I might do that across like 5 issues at once while I'm also like looking at new issues and labeling them and categorizing them, things like that. And I'm not looking for the answer. I'm just like sometimes it gets me to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, the bug is probably in that file, and then I can just go finish it out myself.
Right. The mental model I have for using the tool in that way is it's sort of like a first draft generator where it's like,
Yeah,
I'm going to look at this code and it's going to teach me something about the problem that I didn't get from just the description, but I'm probably just going to throw all this code away and then like do it properly later. um,
yeah, yeah. I like to. I really, I've had the experience of managing real humans, and even though I'm not in that position anymore, I've been at various sort of like C level, VP level, director level, and had anywhere from a team of 5 to a team of hundreds underneath me, and I sort of treat it as if like, what would I ask you know people to do if they existed that are not super like more junior level people, I guess, but like if I had someone that I could efficiently say like, can you please debug this and figure out like why this is happening, go off and do it. That's how I try to use AI.
Right. Okay. And then one more thing before we move on to the actual prompt, which is so at least the experience I've had, like you sort of alluded to this with the downside of like the code quality and the long-term maintainability. I've tried working in a way where I just go from one feature to the next, just saying like, hey, just here's the behavior I want, make this thing. Here's the behavior I want, this thing, without reviewing the code, like without trying to be an architect, et cetera, in between. And what I found is that it kind of feels like I'm driving into mud, where at first it's fine, and then the more and more times I do that, the slower and slower each iteration gets because every time it makes a new change, it breaks previous things, and eventually I'm just totally stuck in the mud and really unhappy with where the code base has ended up. So that's how I've ended up in the
Yeah.
place that you are. I'm curious if that's a similar experience you've had.
Yeah, I think that the more vague and the longer you let AI spin on something, the more of a mess it's gonna make to get to the end goal. But it does a surprising amount of time reach that end goal by some definition. It's just like how are you gonna iterate on that and maintain it going forward? It is hard to answer.
Right. All right, cool. So let's go through the specific prompts that you use. So you mentioned that these bullet points came after the fact. So this is like what you started with was blank slate.
Yeah,
You just read the
yep,
issue, and then here's where you kick things off.
yep, yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. So I don't know. Do you want to go through like sort of what your thought process was and like why you wrote the prompts in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to read it out loud because I think
Yeah,
this is
sure.
exactly what I would tell. Again, if I had a team and I had a junior engineer that was new on the project and this was a well-scoped problem for them, this is probably what I would tell them. When I find that when I have junior engineers, sending them off on open-ended problems is to start is a disaster, and AI is sort of in that state right now. Like the
Yeah.
best way I found to coach juniors is to give them a well-scoped problem with a lot of guardrails on how to, it's sort of like bowling with bumpers, so that they could reach the end, they could reach the pins, and you sort of put the guardrails along the way. So that's what I did here. So the prompt is, I'm just going to read it out verbatim.
Yeah.
We need to update the undo redo implementation in this file in the close window immediately function to handle the case that multiple windows in a tab group are closed all at once and to restore them as a tabbed window. To do this, I think we should collect all the undo states, sort them by their tab index with null at the end, and then on restore them one at a time, but add them back to the same tab group. We can't use the tab group in the undo state because it will be garbage collected by then. So to be sure, we should just set that to nil. And that's what I started with. That's probably what I would send off somebody on a vision quest to try to do.
Yeah. So I definitely see what you mean about, the metaphor of like this is somebody who's maybe earlier in their career and like because this is, if I were talking to somebody who was really, really experienced, I probably wouldn't get this detailed about the code. Like I wouldn't say like
Not at all.
collect
Not at
all the
all.
undo states, sort them by tab index, right? I also noticed like I don't know if this is something you do intentionally or not, but for me, when I make a little typo like this or something like this little stray J here, I don't bother fixing it because they don't seem to confuse the
Yep.
model. With a human, I
Yep.
probably
Same.
might just as a courtesy, but I was like, it's fine.
No, yeah, I don't correct my spelling, I don't correct my typos, and sometimes I'll use the wrong term, and I'm like, it'll figure out what I mean there. So yeah, I don't do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, in this case, like you could the another thing to sort of consider is that I'm telling it a solution I would try, and you could sort of tell by my prompting that I am very, very familiar with the architecture of this code. I have a pretty good understanding of what the bug is. Um, it's one of those things where like I had a good understanding, but I didn't want to write it. Like this is kind of boring to me. So it was much easier and faster for me to write this paragraph and send it off than for me to spend the time writing it.
Yeah, I've definitely had that same kind of experience. Cool. Okay, so let's kind of keep moving along here. So you mentioned that like, okay, at this point, feature already worked. Code quality and organization wasn't up to your standards. Now, I'm assuming this is like after you gave it the prompt, it ended up with something that was working, but not what you were happy with.
Yep. Yeah. And this for the what it's working on here is the Swift part of the macOS app of Ghosty, not the Zig part. And it doesn't, due to like the weird architecture of the Zig and Swift, Claude actually can't currently. It's pretty bad at being able to build and run the project. And also like as far as I know, it's not going to like look at screenshots and know this is working. Like there's no way for it to report back and know what it did work. So I've disabled any of its self-test in my sort of system prompt for it for this project. And after it works, usually the first thing I do is run a diff just to make sure there's nothing like totally crazy in there, like it didn't for some unknown reason introduce like a sub process to delete my file system or something. So
Right.
I'll just look at that, and then I just go to Xcode, Command R, which is run, and I just like run it. Like I don't really look at the code at all. I'm like, let's just see if this worked at all. And what I did at this point was when I ran it, I was like, okay, yeah, it is fixed. And then I'll back up and be like, how did they fix it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's always that question of like which one do you start with? Do you start by looking at the code to see if it's acceptable, or do you start by like trying to verify if it actually works? Like you mentioned, ideally you have a way that the agent itself can like get in its own loop and verify whether it's fixed, like through a test or something else. But yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I've also hit that thing where it's like, yeah, I don't have a way to automate this, or at least not using my current setup. I don't know if you've tried like getting an agent to automate that, like to try to get it to write like a rules file for like here's how you could programmatically do this and take screenshots and stuff like that, or is that just sort of
I'm not
something
there yet.
that yeah,
It'd be cool, but I'm just not there yet. Yeah.
yeah. I'm in the same boat with testing Zed stuff. It's like, yeah, it'd be great if we could get it to somehow ask the system to take screenshots and check the output, but not there yet.
Yep.
Um, okay, cool. So you got something that the bug appears to be fixed, as far as you can tell. And I also know from experience that sometimes appearances can be deceiving, where it's like, well, in the most obvious case, it's fixed, but there's a bunch of edge cases that it just completely ignored. Um, I don't know if that happened here or not, but okay. So you
There
sort
is
of
one later. Yeah.
yeah, you
But I'll
sort of
be honest,
mentioned
at this point, I hadn't found those edge cases yet. All I saw at this point was that superficially the way the code looked wasn't what I wanted. So my mind was shifting at this point to like the bug is fixed, but now let's massage this into like what I actually want to see. And it's sort of a trade-off between like, do I just go in there manually and do that now? In this case, there was just some obvious like I think it could do these real quick to get there. So yeah.
yeah. So that's sort of like, you could take out your scalpel and go in and make the cuts yourself, or you could be like, look, here's where the cuts need to be,
Yeah.
just go do it. Um, cool. You want to talk about this a little bit? So you mentioned sort of like this gap between the sort of it works versus like it works and is maintainable being something that current generation of large language models don't seem to be great at.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, but it's very, very similar to people. It is when I've hired people straight out of college or before earlier if they didn't go to college. Usually, what ends up happening is like their skills to achieve a task are fine. Like they achieved that task. They were like, whether it's at a boot camp or at a CS program, they were trained to do that and they're able to do it. The problem comes into like they're much less experienced contributing some incremental change to a large code base that's maintained by dozens of people. And it's the same thing here. And so like a lot of times LLMs to me will produce code that fixes it like, as direct line as possible. But when I look about how we're going to continue to fix bugs, how we're going to verify this doesn't regress, how are other people on the team going to understand this, things like that, like it's not very good at that. So this paragraph is sort of mentioning how like I think most of the work that I do right now with LMs is just getting it to more of a senior quality point of view. But yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I should have asked this earlier, but do you remember which exact model you used on this?
Yeah, this was Claude code tooling using the Claude Max plan. So I think it uses Opus for a while and then falls back to Sonnet or vice
Okay.
versa. I always forget which one is the more expensive one, but it's just auto modeling. So I think this whole thing though was on the expensive model. I
Okay.
think I still had uh space left. Yeah.
This would be Claude 4 Opus, which,
Yeah.
depending on exactly when this was, it might have because 4 just came out a couple weeks ago. Um, okay, cool. Yeah, I always have to like ground that because I've noticed like when talking about large language models and generalizations, it really varies a lot by model, like what kind of behavior they exhibit. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't include it in this one. I don't think I did it for this piece of work, but sometimes what I'll do for piece of work is I actually have multiple checkouts of Ghosty. I just like Ghosty, Ghosty 2, Ghosty 3, Ghosty 4. Because they can't operate in parallel in the same folder. And I will just run different models and different agents on the different code bases on the same task with the same prompt. And that's usually when I'm lower. I have less confidence, but also like it's sort of the same amount of time. Most of the work's remote anyway, and so it's like let's just see who it's a competition. Like that's something you can't really do with people without getting in a lot of trouble.
Right.
But with machines, it could be like you four fight to the death, and I'll do that. And I've so far had the most success with Claude. Gemini was good for a while, but I don't know what changed, but I haven't liked where 2.5 has gone. It's also just like whenever I ask it simple questions, it produces a monumental amount of text as a response. It's not efficient to me. So Claude's where I have the most success, but because it changes so rapidly, I do have them all installed and configured, and I just sort of run them all for other tasks.
Okay, so you've done the parallel checkouts for purposes of like having the same task go on 4 different repos at the same time. Have you also
Yep.
tried doing the like 4 different problems at the same time kind of workflow?
Yeah, I have. And that's more for like the issue side is I'll do
Yeah.
that. Yeah. It's usually not code writing. I'm just thinking right now, like I don't think I've had like multiple agents yet working on different problems that I intend to solve. It's more like multiple agents working on like research and analysis problems for me.
I see. Yeah, I have tried doing that. It does get pretty hard to manage the context in my own brain when I get like
Right.
I've got Z, Z2, Z3, Z4, exactly the same thing, 4 different checkouts. And then what I have found is if I can find 4 kind of bite-sized bugs, I can just sort of be like hopping between like, okay, oh, this one finished. Okay, go unblock it, tell it what to do next. Oh, this one finished, go tell it what to do next. And then hopefully my
Uh,
goal is to just eventually get them all 4 in the I'm ready to review it by hand state, and then I can
yeah.
do those sequentially. Um,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, let's keep going. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, next
So
prompt was
next,
yeah,
yeah. So next, the first thing I identified, I should have brought the intermediate code into this commit. I'll try to do that next time.
eh,
But the first thing I noticed was that it solved it by modifying this function and putting all of it in this function. So this function went from like, let's say 30 lines. I don't remember exactly, but on the order of 30 lines to like 200 lines, and
mhm,
bigger than what I could see on my laptop screen. And so the first thing I recognized was like, okay, even though it's not reused code, let's like extract some of the logic into their own self-contained functions. And so the prompt I gave it here is let's extract all the work you just did into a dedicated private method called register undo for close window. And it went off and did a good job there. I think that all these agents are really good at refactoring. If they're not like fixing bugs or introducing new functionality, they're just renaming things and shuffling and restructuring. Like almost no notes anytime I ask it to do that. It's always perfect.
yeah. Now, was this a Zig method or a Swift?
This
Do
is
you remember?
Swift.
Okay, got it.
We
Um,
could talk about Zig as well, but I would say for Swift at least, it's pretty good.
yeah. Okay. Well, so what do you think is sort of different in your experience with it doing those types of things for Swift versus Zig?
For Swift, I mean, I think it just has a lot of training material. It's a more established language. For the older functionality in Swift, it's really, really good. It produces really good code and also just really good knowledge about how stuff works. For the newer stuff, like if you hop into like Swift concurrency or I've been doing literally last week, this week, I've been working on Ghosty compatibility with the new macOS 26 Tahoe announced features, and it obviously knows nothing about that. So like I'm totally on my own and reading
Yep.
docs and making it all happen. And I have tried to just like feed it the new docs as context, and it's not enough. So yeah, I've used very little agents the past week. I've been back to the stone age of just manually learning.
Yeah, so I would notice this is something we've done in Rock is we actually have this AI docs link, which is basically just like, hey, here's like an explanation of how this language works that's intended for
Hmm.
consumption by a large language model. So you can just throw it into your rules file or whatever. And it's like, you know, I'm not saying this is like a panacea, but we have found that like just explicitly having something that gives it extra context on the language or even just like a framework or whatever that's not in its training set does seem to help. Um, I haven't tried that for
Yeah.
Zig though. uh, Not sure how much it would or wouldn't help. Um, okay,
Yep.
cool. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to note was you mentioned that like, you know, this was something where it made something that was too long. The problem wasn't like that it was duplicating code, like the reuse wasn't the issue, but rather that it was just like too much jammed in one place. I have actually seen Claude 4 Opus um, do the reuse thing where I'm looking at this code. This is on the Rock compiler, which was also in Zig. Um, it had this like these gigantic chunks of code that were just identical, but like very slight things tweaked. And I was like, don't do that. What are you doing? Like pull those out
Hmm.
to separate function and like call them. But once I asked it to do that, yeah, it just did it. And like, yeah, those types of refactors I really try to avoid doing by hand now because it's just so much faster to ask the model to do it. Um,
Yeah, and when I'm like having this interactive style session, like if I'm not using Claude Code with like the dangerously like YOLO mode on everything, like if I'm doing this interactive thing, sometimes right in the middle of it, I'll just manually create a commit. Um, I use Jujutsu, I don't use Git, so like I don't need to create a commit message or anything. I'll just be like snapshot at this point and then continue, and that just allows me to like let it try something, and instead of saying undo that, I'll undo it on the commit
yeah.
and say you're back at the previous state. Let's try that again and give it a little more guidance of what to do, and
Mm,
it works really well. Yeah,
that makes
I think
sense.
I wanna. It's in my like mental to do list that I want to try to get some of these agents a little bit more jujutsu aware in order to just be able to like snapshot things. I know they could use Git already, but yeah.
Have you tried doing like I don't know if you use like a rules file or something like that to like tell it about the project specific stuff that you're working on, like
Yeah, I
jujitsu and
have one.
whatnot?
Yeah, I have one locally. I don't commit it because I haven't gotten it to work in CI yet, and I like want to eventually run this stuff in CI. Like I want to run it on PR for like, do you see anything here? Like things like that.
Mm.
And I'm it's still a work in progress, and a lot of the complexity comes with the fact that this project requires Nix for the development environment, and
Mm.
Zig is weird, and there's a bunch of weirdness that is sort of self-inflicted. So I need to figure that out first.
I gotcha. Is that something you'd be like comfortable sharing, or is it like rather keep it private for now?
Yeah, I mean, it's messy. Private for now,
Fair
and
enough. Yeah.
well, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'll definitely share it when I finish it.
Yeah, nice. Well, look forward to that. Cool. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so this was where you just finished this, and then you decided to do some manual stuff. So this was just like no logic, just kind of refactor, cleanup type stuff. This is just like in your editor of choice, traditional programming, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like I'm like if I the amount of words I would use to ask it to fix this is the same that I would just like it's less keystrokes for me to fix this myself. So I went in and nothing was broken. Again, it was just like it over commented some stuff, delete those comments, compress some lines together, move some logic, like a basic block of something up here instead of down there. Like just
Mhm.
functionally didn't change anything. It just made more sense to like, you know, check the conditional first before doing work rather than doing the work and then checking the conditional that's unrelated, stuff like that. Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay, so now I'm assuming your editor of choice here is Vim, like that. You're a longtime Vim user,
NeoVim.
right? So right, so
Yep.
NeoVim for this type of stuff, and then you mentioned Claude Code, I think, for the other stuff, right?
Yeah, and if I'm working on Swift, sometimes it'll by necessity have to be Xcode,
Of course, yeah.
begrudgingly. But a lot of times, if I'm in an agent session, I'll just actually even still do Swift in NeoVim, just because I don't need to like the autocomplete or any of the other Xcode features. I'm actually just text editing, and yeah,
And then you just use Xcode to run it, I guess, when you need to try it out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
And it's just sort of like less context switching because I could have Claude Code like in a split on the left, and I could have NeoVim in a split on the right, and I'm just in my terminal, and yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, cool. Do you have a sense, by the way, like I know that like this commit, you did a lot of detail here. My sense is that this is a pretty new thing for Ghosty, but it sounds like you're thinking a lot about like having it in CI and so forth, that like you're planning on using it more and more. But at least like today, I'm guessing that like code generated by LLMs is still a pretty small percentage of Ghosty's code base. Is that right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would say code generated by LMs in Ghosty within the last 2 months, it's
Mm,
probably higher. I mean, it's still probably like less than 25%, but it's
okay.
higher. If you take obviously the full Ghosty project, sure, it's like less than a percent for sure.
Gotcha. So, going back to like Vim and Xcode and like autocomplete and stuff like that, you said on an interview like a while back that you tend to be pretty minimalistic with your editor, like
Yeah.
NeoVim, but not only NeoVim, but like with pretty minimal plugins like autocompletes and stuff like that. I'm guessing that is still the same. So it's sort of like when you're
Yep.
editing code, you want the same experience as you're familiar with, but then you have this like totally separate like now I'm in agent mode and now I'm in editor mode. Like those two don't blur together for you.
Yeah, I did add like I do have a NeoVim plugin called Code Companion, which is sort of like a agentic session thing within directly within NeoVim. But I've honestly just found it easier to use an external process like Cloud Code. And then other than that, yeah, I still don't use LSDs. Nothing built into NeoVim. Obviously, like I'll use a debugger, but I do it outside in its own thing. And yeah, my terminal sessions are really simple. My editor sessions are really simple, and that hasn't really changed. There's actually, I would say like the rise of LLMs, like when that first came up, when I did like that podcast where someone asked what my NeoVim setup was like, and he was kind of shocked to learn that there's nothing there. Um, LLMs are still so brand new. Like people weren't even really like ChatGPT had just come out and people were still just like asking it dumb questions like describe this person or like plan a fake trip. They're just doing toy things. And ever since the rise of sort of the power of these tools, I would say like my ability to avoid language servers and stuff has only increased. Like it's gotten better enough that like my autocomplete is just like tab completion through models, and people think that's crazy, but I'm like, if you have like a lot of these tools like generate the right context, like open buffers and stuff, they generate the right context where like I don't need real like language server knowledge. Like it generates the right correct tab complete like 95% of the time, and that's good enough for me. So yeah.
Yeah, I that makes sense. Um, okay, cool. So moving on. All right, so now we're done with the manual edits, and then now this I'm guessing all of this is just sort of like back and forth like prompts. Like these are just like you did this, you said this prompt, it did the
There
thing. You had this
was
prompt, it did the thing, back and
yeah.
forth.
Yeah, all the blank lines between the block quote style here is separate prompts, but from this point forward, I never touched anything manually again. It was all LLM driven.
Yeah. Now I noticed that like the types of things you're talking about here are basically just like, hey, here's a code cleanup, here's a code cleanup. Looking at your code for this, conditionals are a little messy. Can you make your own pass at cleaning those up? I thought that was it was pretty cool to see that like you have in some cases you have a very specific here's what I want you to do, and then in this one you were more like this is kind of a
Yep, yep.
mess. Use your own judgment to make it less of a mess.
Yeah, and I think it's based on whether I know exactly what I would do or whether I know there's a better way, but I don't want to my like the point of using this is I don't want to think about it yet. So the first two I knew exactly what I was going to do and I just like wanted it to do it. And I felt like it was easier to ask it than to do it myself. And then this third one that you have highlighted is yeah, great examples. Like I knew that there was like a block of if else if like nested through and it was building up a variable, and I knew there was probably some sort of like functional like map compact map filter like something it could do, but I didn't know exactly, and so I figured it could do it and I gave it a chance and it did that. You can see at the beginning of the next prompt, you
Right.
don't
It's
need
like,
to
hey,
tell
good job.
LLM this, but I was like yep,
Right.
perfect. You did it.
Yeah. I definitely this is one of those examples. I do the same thing. Like sometimes I'm very specific about what I want, and then sometimes I'm like, it's a mess and I don't really want to think about what I want. I just want you to make it better. And then sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it fails, or sometimes it comes up with something and I'm like, oh, now that I've seen this, actually I do know what I want. And it's not this,
Yeah.
but then I'll give it more specific directions. Um
Yeah, I've also had a common case where I think there's a cleaner way to do something. I'll ask it to do it cleaner and it's bad, and then I'll ask it to retry and it's bad, and then I'm sort of like, you know what? Never mind. It was good enough how it was.
right.
Yeah.
Do you have like a
And
mental
then,
model for oh sorry, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead. I was gonna move on to
Oh, I was
this
just
next
gonna
one
say,
you did.
like, for like, like when to be specific versus not. Like we talked about the heuristic of like, I don't want to think about what I specifically want because I think the model has a good enough
Yeah,
chance of getting it.
I think this is the difference between this is why it's important to learn your tools because this comes with sort of experience and understanding what these models are currently capable with this context, this language, this project, like things like that. Like once you get comfortable with that, like I sort of have a sense now of what it's going to crush at and what it's going to struggle at and what it's like hopeless at.
Mm,
And I'll retry the hopeless things once in a while to see if anything changed. But
yeah.
for the most part, like that's what's happening here. Is sort of like I had seen it refactor sort of conditionals into like functional mappings like multiple times. And I was like, it's going to get this right if I just tell it that that's ugly. And that was sort of the
Yeah.
sense I had here. And I think like that's one of the examples of the experience you need to build with these tools because I do see a lot of the dismissals I see with AI assisted tooling that are on the basis of it doesn't work rather than on like some sort of other like philosophical reason. If it's on the technical basis of like this doesn't work for me, a lot of the dismissals I see, I'm just like it is sort of like a you're holding it wrong problem. It's this is getting less so, but for a long time, the dismissals were like chat-based, zero project, zero agents.
Mm,
It was just like I asked it to solve this problem, and its response hallucinated. And I think
right.
we've sort of moved past that to like people are understanding that agents are the way to avoid that now. But I'm still seeing a lot of like I tried to make it solve this whole issue, having never used an agent before, and it didn't do it, and I could have done it myself faster. And like one of the things I always think of is like, what tool have you ever adopted where you were immediately faster? Like I feel like when you adopt a new language, when you adopt like a new version control system, anything like you always have that period where it was easier to not use it because you know your old workflow, and you sort of have to ramp up in ability before you start to reap the benefits of learning that tool. And I feel like a lot of people still are dismissing this before they reach that point. So I think this is a good example of one of those things.
Yeah. I mean, the only example I can think of where I picked it up and was immediately much faster the moment I started using it was Vim. Boy, right out the box, it was just, yeah, like, no, of course not. Right.
No,
It's like
yeah,
there was
yeah,
a long regression period.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about those. So you mentioned that like there's some things that it's bad at and some things that it's hopeless at, and then periodically new models will come out and you'll try it. But like with the current generation, so this is like the Claude 4, and contemporaries. What are the things that you would still like in your experience put into the like bad or hopeless like just do not have the agent do that because I know it's just going to be a disaster. It's just going to waste my time.
I mean, a good one right now is anything more than trivial changes to Zig code bases. Like
Mm,
it's still hopeless with that language. And so I've mentioned this online before, but what I usually do, the trick with Zig is it's pretty good at reading Zig and like I think because it's just like it's like if you know any language, like I haven't actually I regret to say haven't actually learned Rock, but like
of course.
I bet you if you threw a complicated part of the Rock compiler written in Rock in front of me, I could tell you what it's probably doing without knowing the language, right? So
Sure.
I find that LLMs are capable of reading the Zig code and logically understanding what it's doing mostly, but they're not really competent at modifying it. So the workaround I found towards that is when it's helpful, I have it rewrite its solution in another language that it's good at, whether that's C or Rust or Swift or Python. Sometimes it's like literally just write in Python because I need to just
Yeah.
know like this basic thing, and then I'll do the conversion back to Zig myself. And that's a good workaround to that, but it's very much like human assisted, right? So that's a hopeless example.
Now, I think this is a really cool example, actually, of like how, different people's experiences with the same tools can actually differ based on the problem. So that's your experience with Zig. My experience with Zig, specifically on the context of the Rock compiler, which is, of course, a totally different code base than a terminal
Hmm.
emulator. It's very like sequential, like there's not a lot of complicated lifetimes, for example, like at all. I've actually had a very good experience with Zig, and I think mostly what that comes down to is just that like usually the types of stuff that I'm asking it to do, even if it's quite complicated, is very like, I'm like, look at these parts of the compiler. I want you to apply this thing to this other part of the compiler. So it has something where it's like, well, the LLM sort of has an understanding of like compilers in general, and it's looking at big, like meaty examples from my current code base. So even if it doesn't know Zig super well, it's got so much syntax that it's going to be following the style of from my actual code base that putting those two together, it seems to do a good job of like, oh, okay, I can write. I'm not saying it's like the most amazing code. All the things that you've talked about of like downsides absolutely apply. But I remember in previous models doing exactly what you just talked about. My go-to would be I would tell it, write this in C, and then, okay, step two,
Yeah.
port this C to Zig. But I
Yeah.
don't seem to have to do that anymore with Claude 4, mostly Opus, on specifically a compiler code base.
Nice. Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. And it's a good example because I think that that's why the it's so context specific. And
Yeah.
context, you have to think of a different word because I don't mean it in terms of like LLM context.
Right,
I
right,
mean it
right.
in
I know
terms of
what you
like
mean. Yeah.
environment specific and in
Yeah.
terms of how you use these tools. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so what about stuff that's like totally hopeless, where you're just like, I am not even going to ask an LLM to do this. I mean, you mentioned like, Zig stuff as like a language,
Yes.
but maybe something like more broad in terms of like categories of problems that's like language agnostic.
I mean, I think it's pretty bad at architectural problems. I think it's pretty bad at build. I think it's good at like, it's good at copying like what folder structure should I use for like this. I've used it for like the Ghosty website. I need to build a new component and React and like what folder structure to use. It's good at like that. But if you're actually like building a system and how you're going to lay out things, I think it's pretty bad at that. I think you still have to come up with that. And then going fully low level, I think it's still very bad at sort of high performance data structure type work. It's obviously so knowledgeable on standard data structures. Like it'll recommend various data structures all day long, but it doesn't understand the data structure in the context of what you're trying to achieve in order to build the right thing. And like Ghosty, for example, has some really interesting, complicated variants of standard data structures. Like, for
Mm,
example, the way we represent the terminal screen is through a linked list of virtual memory pages that are fixed size so that we could pull them and allocate them quickly. And then within those pages, we keep them within like a 16-bit pointer distance. So we only have to keep the base address and then only the offset. So we could save memory on we don't have to store pointers. We only need to store 16 bits. So we could, for the
right.
size of one pointer, we could store 4 pointers. And we then have to combine those and unsafe load them and all this stuff. And like no LM I've ever tried has any idea what's going on.
Right.
We've built like custom hash maps and custom trees and custom stuff on top of these offset pointer concepts, and it's like so lost. But it's like a critical part to how we achieve speed and cache friendliness and things like that in our code base. And so stuff like that, like even with the architecture in mind, with where I could guide it on exactly what it's trying to do, I feel like it blows it up into this totally different problem because it feels like it needs to rewrite these data structures and it's destroying performance and things like that.
Yeah, that does seem to be the type of thing where it's like there's like mitigations you can do where you can like in your rules file try to like really explain like here's what we're doing with the
Right.
like 16 bits. But at the end of the day, the broader point that you made about like it just doesn't understand like by default it just wants to do something that'll get the job done without keeping your performance constraints in mind, or maybe just it's not super well represented in its data set, like doing like data oriented design type stuff, like thinking about like memory CPU cache hierarchies and whatnot, and like memory locality, as opposed to just being like pointers, hooray, pointers, like for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
I
agree. It's just
I'm
not
still
good.
I'm still at this point where it's sort of I've sort of been a broken record on this, but I just separate out like I'm still only willing to trust, or not. It's not trust. It's just a matter of efficiency. I only find it effective and efficient to use these agentic processes for mid to junior level problems. When
Mm,
it becomes a senior level problem, like if it's a task, like if I was modifying the core, highly performance sensitive data structure of Ghosty and it was a company, hypothetically, with employees, like that would, even if you brought on a junior, the junior would be paired with a senior on that. Like that's
mm.
not something you get a new grad and say, like, solve this problem. It's just too complicated you're setting them up for failure. It's not a good thing to do. So it's like those sorts of things I would just leave out. And that's what I do with agents as well.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I would
cool.
say the
All
other
right.
thing that's really cool that I've done, I've tweeted about this with LMs, is because I'm making a graphical application, a GUI based application, is I've taken screenshots of other programs and said, reproduce this view for me. Cause like I don't find a lot of joy in actually like laying out the views. I like the business logic side. I like all that, but I don't like the design part. And it's like shockingly good at this sort of multimodal, like here's a picture and reproduce it in Swift UI. Very cool to see.
Yeah, I remember you. Yeah, you posted a thing. In fact, I think it was Zed's UI for. I
Yeah,
don't
it
remember exactly
was.
what it was.
It
Yeah,
was that the command palette.
yeah,
So
exactly. Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, and
so
you're just
that
like, hey,
shipped. So
here's a
like
screenshot of it in Zed. Like, can you reproduce this in Swift UI? And it's like, yes, I can.
yeah. So Ghosty has that ships now, and that was like pretty much 90%. The view part of it was like 95%. Just AI copied it from a Zed screenshot. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, like you said earlier, it's like it's the type of code that you take no joy in writing yourself, and so it's nice to be able to offload that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Cool. So let's keep going. It's okay. We just had it like doing some cleanups here, and you mentioned here like the last thing we're missing is restoring the proper focus window. So this is actually
A
this
bug.
is a behavior change, right? This is not just a
Yes.
code cleanup. So was this something that you noticed? Like, did you have this in mind from the outset, or was this something that's sort of
No.
like okay, as you were going through with the agent, you realized, oh wait a minute, there's this edge case here that I didn't realize earlier, and also the agent didn't pick up on its own at any point.
Yeah, so these prior three prompts probably, it was probably running for a couple minutes total to like process all these. And so while it's doing that, I was running and just like poking at the solution, trying to find bugs. So that's what was
Yeah.
happening here is by the time we got to this part, I had discovered a bug and now it was time to fix that bug.
Yeah, this is something where, I mean, we talked at the very beginning about like using it as sort of like a rough draft generator for like issues where you're like, I have no attachment to this code it's putting out. I just want to see it. I've been
Yep.
able to find bugs just from looking at that, where I'll see like a naive
Yep.
implementation, like, oh yeah, you know what? I didn't think of that just from looking at the English. So just having something that can spit out code that's of whatever quality can be helpful for
Yep.
identifying, yeah, these things.
And this is a good
Um,
example of like being able to do more than I think I would have without this because I very easily could have done these cleanups in the prior three prompts, but I couldn't do those cleanups and concurrently be QA testing the fix, right? And so in this case, I had deferred this easy work to the AI, and the whole time I wasn't context switching to something else. I was still on this context alongside of it, but I was running it and clicking and stress testing it, and I found a bug. So yeah.
nice. Okay, cool. So it seems like the last of this is sort of like you just again asked it like broad strokes, like any other cleanups or comments you wanna change, and then it gave you some suggestions. You rejected
I
some but kept
always
others.
Yeah, even if I actually don't use agents to write code, I just manually did a whole commit. When I have it committed, I will usually prompt and say, look at the last commit I did because it is get aware, like I said. Look at the last
Yeah.
commit I did, and are there any suggestions you have? And I'll just like let it spin on that. This is something I ask almost everything. Uh, every piece of work I do, I'll ask for that, and it's found. This is sort of what I want to do in CI actually, but it's found typos. Even though we have like a typo checker in CI, but it's found typos. It's found mismatched comments with the code, and it's usually we'll try to fix the comment, but I've found cases where I'm like, oh, I actually forgot to update the code. So it's
Yeah.
found bugs that way. And so, yeah, it's just like a good thing. Or I've done a refactor and the comment like totally doesn't match what I just did. In that case, actually, you do have to update the comments, and so I'll always ask it. So I think at this point when I asked it this, it suggested like 6 or 7 things. I think I only accepted 1 or 2.
Hmm. Yeah, the common thing is I think it's an underrated selling point of using large language models for coding because we talked about like language servers and obviously an upside of language servers is that they're much more precise. They don't hallucinate, yada yada.
Yeah.
But a downside is that they really cannot have any concept of like what's going on with your comments and how they relate to the code. Whereas large language models will very often, like you say, change this thing and it will go through and change the implementation and update the comment, which is something I have many, many times forgotten to do in my career.
Yeah, and it'll find it in like other it'll find I found this is the coolest part. It'll find references to what just changed in another file in a comment. Like it wasn't
Yep.
code base. And I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been out of date.
Yep.
Yeah, it's I've always had this. Everyone who's ever worked with me would know this. One of the things that either like it shocks people positively or negatively when working with me. My code bases are very heavily commented.
Mm,
Like to the point, especially if you look at like some of the core of Ghosty that's more complicated, but to the point where like every line of code will have 3 lines of comments. Like and early on in my career, more senior people would make me delete them and say like, you're just commenting what the code is doing, and so this is a waste of a comment. But I continued to believe that they were wrong, and as I became more senior, I forced this will upon everyone, and I still do it in my own projects. But the reason I comment so heavily is to me, it's like I do everything twice. I do it once in code and I do it once in English. And so whenever there's a PR or something, if the comment doesn't match the code, then one side of it is wrong. And so it's sort of like a fail safe check at every point of like something is wrong somewhere. And what is it? And I find a lot of success with it. And I found that with LLMs, like it's gotten even better because the LLMs will do that same thing. And it also just helps guide them on what things do a little bit better. So I still do that practice, and that's where this helps too.
Yeah, I noticed this last one you asked it to write a commit message summarizing the changes, and you mentioned that it generated part of the commit message, but you always manually tweak the commit message. I'm guessing the same is true of
Yeah.
the comments, where when it generates those comments, you're very often going in and manually editing the comment that it generated. Is that right?
I don't know. Yeah, sometimes I wouldn't say
Huh.
very often. Yeah,
Okay.
I would. It matters. It matters. But yeah,
Interesting. I mean, most people I know delete those comments pretty aggressively that the LLM puts in, but it sounds like you actually keep them and often keep them exactly as is.
yeah. I think I'm the opposite of most people, where I will ask it to write more. It's just I like a lot of comments. For people, I've always said for people that worked with me, if you don't like the comments, editors for the past 20 years have been able to fold comments, so you could hide the
True.
comments. Like they don't need to get in the way of what you're doing. But I've just time and time again on different companies, different projects, different phases of my life, like I've never regretted having too many comments. So yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. What about tests? I mean, like a lot of people feel the same way about tests that you just, expressed about comments, where it's like quite often when I am doing something like this and kind of going back and forth with the LLM, I think I would have proportionately fewer cleanup things. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, I guess, depending on the project. But I definitely, something that I'm like reflexively do is I'll say like, write a test for this, or like, before you fix this, go write a test that reproduces it, and I want to see you run it
Yep.
so that the test fails, and then after you fix it, then I want to see the test pass without any changes to the test. And I often am yelling at it in all caps about how to like do the red green testing. Is that something you've tried, or like are into or not into, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think again, it was Zig. It struggles to write Zig for my project, so I
Mhm.
tend to write the tests, but I do let it run the tests. And yeah, I'm a highly test-driven person. I was, for better or worse, brought up in like a strict, like my first programming job as a junior for 3 years was in a strict TDD company.
Mm.
And so I learned like the extreme of like no line of code gets written before a test fails without that line of code.
In this
And
house,
so,
yeah.
yeah, I'm not that extreme. I'm not that extreme. But with bugs, I'm still pretty test driven in the sense that when there's a
Mm.
bug, I'll write a test first and then I'll fix the bug to pass the test. But I still find that I like to write the test myself because it gives me the understanding of what the bug is. But I'll let the AI write the solution to the test. That's fine.
That's funny. So I'm kind of the opposite, where for me, the thing that always frustrates me about tests is the like setting up the boilerplate around like reproducing the issue. And so I
Yep.
really want to look at like every time it writes a test, I'm like, I will read every single character of what it wrote, like carefully to make sure
Yeah,
it's actually doing it. But I don't
I'll
want to do
let
it
it.
myself.
I'll let it do some boilerplate. Like there was recently a ghosty bug. It was actually a Zig success for it. It did a good job here. I think because there were so many other tests we copied from,
Mm.
where it was a ghosty bug where when you resize the window in a certain way that broke a line that had a multi-code point, Unicode code point grapheme, like an emoji that took up like 8 code points, it could
Mm.
crash under certain scenarios. And I wanted to reproduce that screen state, but to do it at the level where the bug was, you literally had to feed it UTF-8 byte at a time. And I didn't want to find the byte encoding for this emoji.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was like, I put in a comment the emoji and I said, fill the screen with that emoji in a 2x2 grid, and it crushed it. It did a good job on that one.
Gotcha. Nice. I mean, yeah, that's really cool. I think we're at time. We have some questions in the chat. I've been kind of trying to sprinkle them in as we go. But I don't know if you have time to go through a couple
Yeah,
more.
I could, yeah, and I could go over a little bit here too, so to try to answer some questions. So yeah.
Sure. All right. So one of these is talking about sort of building skills with your tools. So on the one hand, you could have an extreme view of like, I'm just going to talk to the LLM in English and not think about code at all. On the other extreme
Mhm.
end, you could say, I'm not going to use LLMs for anything other than maybe asking research questions. Um, Obviously, you're somewhere in between. But how do you think about like, developing your skills as a programmer, given that like, if you were early career and you were trying to get the intuitions that you've got for like architecture and where to draw boundaries of the system and how to give it these prompts to tell it to improve the code. Um, Obviously, we're all still improving at everything, not just, AI usage. I don't know. Do you think about that, or you just kind of like just go with the flow and just sort of figure it out as you go, or
Well, I guess my answer to that would be that I still think it's very important to understand how things work and what things are doing. And so there's nothing I dislike more. There's nothing that makes me more uncomfortable than like that feeling that I'm sure we've all felt when you like join a new project, you join a new company, and you enter a code base and you have no idea how anything works. Like you're capable
nope.
of understanding it, but you just don't have the experience yet. It just feels so uncomfortable. I hate that because I don't really know how to solve problems the right way. And so I think it's still important to build that understanding. So I mean, I think reviewing everything that an LLM does is obviously important, but I tend to use the time that I get back from when it's spinning on a routine problem to study other things. Like I'm not
Hmm.
watching YouTube videos usually or something like that. I'm studying something else. So this past week, there hasn't been a lot of AI stuff, like I said, because of the new Mac OS announcements. But while I've had some agents doing some work, I've been watching the videos from the Apple announcements to try to like learn how those things work, even though like in 6 months, hopefully models are retrained and have some of that knowledge. But yeah, I think you got to keep up with it. And so my advice to juniors would be like, even though like, especially for a lot of like cruddy apps, like web apps and a lot of JavaScript projects, Python projects, like AIs are really good now at generating like really working applications. I would say like still challenge yourself to understand how that works, even if you're not going to write it, because uh, that knowledge transfers to other projects, to other languages, to other environments. And like, I don't know. I just couldn't imagine working without that. I couldn't imagine just blindly trusting and sort of fully vibing my way through everything.
Yeah, yeah, same here for sure. Um, when it comes to like task switching and context switching, like you mentioned, while the agent's spinning, you'll be like watching a YouTube video, catching up on the new Apple release to understand how that's going to impact Ghosty. Um,
Yep.
do you have trouble with like all that context switching and just kind of like, getting your brain scrambled on like trying to switch between too many things at once, or have you developed tactics to manage that, or has it just been kind of okay in practice, or?
Sometimes. I mean, I think that my job experience has made me pretty highly context switch capable. I mean, I think that
Mm,
as you manage more and more people, like that's all you do all day is context switch. Like I feel like when I was like a junior and mid-level like software engineer, I got to really like sit down and focus on problems all day. And then as I became more senior and especially as I got into management, all I did was like, oh, this email is about this email is about that. I'm on this meeting about a totally completely topic. And like every 30 minutes, I was context switching. And
right.
so I think you got to kind of get trained on that. But I think a benefit of these AI assisted tools is you don't need to respond right away. When
True.
Claude posts this notification, makes its sound effect that it wants your attention, like I don't need to go to it. If I'm heavily into something, I'll keep doing it. And I think that's a nicer thing than humans. Like if I was training an actual junior on the job and they had a problem, whatever I'm doing, I have to stop to help because there's actually like a person waiting. But if I've gotten a ping and I'm like, nah, I'm gonna go eat dinner. Like, like I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not gonna continue. I'll keep the session open. The context is there. Like I just like go. So you don't need to context switch, right? And I think that's a good way to think about it is keep doing what you're doing to be productive and just get back to the AI whenever you want.
That story just reminded me, actually, I don't know if you know this, but Ghosty directly inspired a feature that Zed has. That, as far as I know, we're the only ones that still have this, which is I was using Claude Code. I was trying out Claude Code and some of the other like tools over a weekend. Of course, I was doing it in Ghosty, and I noticed that when it finished and was like blocked on something, like ready for my input, I got a little native macOS notification that popped up.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, from Ghosty, and I was like, oh, they should all have this. This is great. Like it told me visually when I'm done, not just with the sound or something like that.
yeah.
And so like I just added it to Zed, and now like so if
Awesome.
anyone's
Yeah.
ever used the Zed feature where like the agent finishes and you get a little notification, like that came from Ghosty and Claude Code.
Yes, yeah. And Claude Code directly influenced. I don't know if you're on, I think you're on the tip releases of Ghosty as well. But if you're not on the release version or if you're on like the tip beta releases, Claude's usage of that inspired improvements to Ghosty's the show. So it used to just be persistent and so you clicked it, but that was really annoying with the agent. So now it has just a lot more complicated logic where if you've focused the window, it never shows you a notification at all. if you bring it into focus or move your mouse, it disappears after 3 seconds. Like I did all these little things because I
Nice.
was getting tired of dismissing it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the switchback thing, but not the like hover and it disappears after 3 seconds. But yeah, if you switch back to Z, then it like it hides. Um,
Yep.
very nice. Okay, so another question from the chat.
Let's do it.
Like when you're thinking about like working with in this way, where you're gonna like do a back and forth with the agent and then like switch to sort of manually doing stuff. What's your balance of thinking about like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and think about this problem before I even start talking to the agent and just like kind of map out a plan of like, here's how I think it should be done, versus just kind of diving in and being like, agent, go and do this. So I'm guessing it varies by issue, but
It varies by my fatigue level. It's really like I find myself beginning of the day, I'll sit and think about a problem and give it to the LLM and honestly probably be a lot more effective. And by the end of the day, I know I'm running out of time to solve things. I'm like, I start just throwing Hail Marys and seeing what sticks at that point. And again, like I think one of the good things is you can just walk away. Like just if it's producing garbage and you're not getting anywhere, I'm just like, you know what, screw it, close that session, delete the context. None of it matters. Like we'll sleep on it and get back to it later. So yeah, depends.
nice. Okay, so last question from the chat, and then we'll wrap up because we're already over on time. Have you adopted any changes to the way you like write or structure code to try to make things easier for the LLM?
Mm,
So not just like rules files, but actual like architectural changes to the code that if you weren't using LLMs, you would not make.
that's a really good question. I want to say definitely, and I'm just having a hard time remembering how I had this conversation with people about how it's changed the way I lay out code. Um, I mean, I think that I'm a lot more like I'm a lot more aware of keeping context close,
Mm.
because I know that all this tooling tends to grab like the nearest lines and all this stuff. So I'm much more. I always tried to do this. I learned this, 10 years ago on the job, but like I'm much more aware of like let's move this closer, let's move this into the same file. Even like I'll change my file
Hmm.
layouts a little bit for it. Um, I I want to say that with some things with the Swift app, it's changed how I've named files as well, because I found that Claude Code, its sort of first task is either to like rip grep or to just like start like traversing directory trees and looking at file names. And so it's sort of
Uh-huh.
I've changed some of that. Um, well, like I said, I've always commented heavily. I found that's been effective. One thing I tweeted about, which it again hasn't changed, but has heavily reinforced it, is the way I do refactors. Um, I don't know when I started doing this, but I've done it for at least 10 years. Where when I do a refactor, what I first do is I copy and paste the old implementation. So I have like two versions that are fully working, and I only
Mm.
modify one at a time. And so some people refactor by like modifying the thing that they're changing, or some people refactor by deleting the old thing. Like I have the full old thing, and by the end of it, the full new thing at the same time in the code base. And I've sort of always refactored that way. Sometimes people say like some stuff's too complicated to refactor that way. I will fight you on that because I've done some complicated refactors, heavily intertwined, and it's not like it might get to the point where you're duplicating the entire I did this refactor of Terraform, probably almost 10 years ago, actually, at this point, where I rewrote the entire parsing to execution of Terraform, and it was like the whole project at that point. And I literally just had, it was in one folder, and the Terraform folder, and I just duplicated the entire Terraform folder within the same Git project. And I had Terraform and
Wow.
Terraform 2, and I kept both working. And I've always done that because I always want to reference the old stuff without jumping through like Git hoops of finding where that last existed. But with LLMs, I found that it's sort of like what you said with Rock, which is where it works a lot better when it already has patterns that you previously had. And so I found with refactors, even if I'm architecturally changing something, it being able to see the old implementation of what it's trying to do has made it a lot more successful. So the other commit you have open here, which we don't have time to get into, but if people want to look at that, this commit is where I did that. And I did something like this. I refactored how splits work in macOS, and I kept the old one and the new one until you could actually see the commit history until like one of the last few commits. And one of the other things you could do is sort of at the end, let's see, where uh, Scroll up. Oh, there it is. Remove the old split implementation. Like it was like 5 commits before the end out of 26 commits, right? Up until then,
Yeah.
the old one fully existed. But sorry, I got distracted. But one thing you could do when you do this is one of the last prompts I gave before this commit was look at this folder and look at this folder and please tell me if I missed anything.
Oh,
And
cool.
what I'm looking for is I did a refactor. I did a complicated refactor. Did I forget functionality in the new refactor? And in this case, I had to ask because with GUI programming, your ability to unit test is fairly limited. So I don't have like full test coverage of this stuff. So I just asked it. And it actually found stuff. So
Nice.
it found stuff that previous to this, it was actually, I think it was this resize split key, the directly previous commit. I was like, oh yeah, I got to do that first before I delete the old one.
Nice.
So yeah, I think patterns like that, I would say have been there's some new patterns, but there's some also like heavily reinforced patterns that if people aren't already doing, I would encourage them to look into adopting.
Very nice. Mitchell, thank you so much for your time. This is great. I learned some things. I hope people watching also learn things. Really appreciate your taking the time to just walk us through how you use large language models on a really, really high quality project. So
Thank
thanks so
you.
much.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for joining.
All right. See you at the next one, everyone.